As I've mentioned occasionally, there is this individual, Stefan Lakatos. And
Hmm.
so Stefan, he was in the history of Moondog, Moondog lived in America most of his life, but he moved to Europe in the early 1970s. And when he moved to Europe, he originally went there for a concert in Germany, but then just didn't come back. He just stayed there.
Hmm.
So he was certainly there like illegally for a period of time, but eventually got his citizenship and was able to continue living out in Europe. But while there, Moondog at this time, he invented other instruments throughout his life. But when he went to Europe, he only brought the trimba with him. And so in his later career and as his music exists today, the only remaining musical instrument that is of contemporary significance is the trimba. He invented others that we hear recordings of, but he didn't use them in his later career. But so when he moved to Europe, this art student, Stefan Lakatos, was very interested by his music and was equally interested as I am in the percussion sounds. He thought it was like a whole percussion ensemble accompanying this classical music, and then soon discovered it was just this trimba instrument. And so Stefan and Moondog actually met. With due time, Stefan built his own trimba and then had Moondog over to his house. Moondog lived in Germany. Stefan was in Sweden. And so the two of them began hanging out. And with due time, Moondog stopped playing the trimba quite as much to accompany his own music and kind of entrusted Stefan to be the trimba player. And although Moondog didn't necessarily teach Stefan much about music writing, Stefan learned from Moondog a lot about how to interpret his music and how to continue playing the trimba and utilize that to accompany the music.
Listen to the vibes.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Listen to the Vibes. And I'm very happy to welcome Julian Calv here with me. And man, you have basically created your own form of an instrument. Is that what I read?
Yeah, so I didn't necessarily create the instrument itself, but I certainly breathe more life into it in a more 21st century mindset. The primary instrument that I play as of now is the trimba, which is a set of two triangular tom drums that are connected to one another, and they're played using a maraca and clave. And although I played that instrument primarily in performance and both in accompanying my compositions, the instrument was actually invented by Moondog, who is a classical composer, and his actual name was Louis T. Hardin Jr. And Moondog built the trimba and utilized it not only as an instrument for solo performance and also as a part of percussion compositions. He'd use it in tandem with other percussion instruments, but he actually used it also as a conducting tool for his symphonic chamber music and like symphonic orchestral music. This composer, he was blind, so instead of conducting using hands, he would conduct with the beat of a drum instead.
Oh, okay. Well, I did get to listen to a couple of the singles, which I believe are they for sale now?
Yeah. So the single release was a two-sided vinyl, Root 4 and Thorn and Roots. This vinyl, it's available through the record company who I work with, Deco Entertainment. It's also available at a couple shops here and there, but you can also find it on various online record stores as well. But the music does not only exist in like a physical vinyl format, it's also been released on the streaming services you can think of, Spotify, Tidal. It's on YouTube as well, SoundCloud and Bandcamp. So just about everywhere that I'm aware of, I've tried to go ahead and have it accessible via those avenues.
Right. So what would you describe the music as, like a bohemian style, or how
Yeah,
do you describe it?
it definitely has a very bohemian aesthetic to it. I mean, if we think to like the lifestyle of Moondog. He was a very bohemian type of individual. This guy, he moved to New York City around like his early 30s. This was like the early 1940s for him. He was born in 1916. And a lot of his music was kind of birthed out of an inspiration just from sheer sound alone that he would then transmit into these more organized series of sounds or sound collages, especially in his earlier career. But it has a very bohemian sound to it. The music is primarily defined by the trimba percussion instrument, which when you listen to it, it has the effect of sounding almost like a percussion group who is performing. It's a very multi-timbral instrument because you have the sound of tom drums, you have the rim shots of these tom drums, there's a set of wood blocks placed on top of the drum, and then there's also a set of bongos, a muted pair of bongos, which I lay on the side of the drum and play those to kind of accent some counter rhythms against the main rhythms being present on the tom drums. So, it's a very, very multifaceted instrument. Certainly anyone who's at home, just go on Google, look up trimba and look at a picture of it. You'll be equally as confused as I was the first time I looked at it. But in tandem with the trimba, which is kind of the main focal point of these compositions, Root 4 has various other percussion parts layered over top of it, including like some bells. There's like a tambourine part in there and a hand drum that I'll play as well. Thorn and Roots is a little different in that it's just the trimba accompanied by a balafon. And a balafon is this very small pentatonic tuned marimba-like instrument. So Thorn and Roots is more of just the percussion and a melody. Root 4 is kind of this percussion collage, a little collection of different instruments that move in tandem with this found audio behind it as well. Another main characteristic of the single Root 4 is that there's actually recorded audio from the interstate highway Route 4 that is kind of a backdrop throughout the whole composition. So you'll hear the rush of cars going by, you'll hear the occasional little bird tweets as they do tend to hang out around the highway there. And it's cool too, because as the cars go by, if you listen very closely, you can sometimes hear like the radio frequencies coming from the cars as well. Like if someone was listening to music in their car, you can hear the ever so faint like voice of something coming through the speaker, like other instruments coming through someone's speaker. So it's kind of cool. It's like a combination of various songs in that grand sense. But
Wow.
Very bohemian. Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Well, before we go any further, man, tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So I was born in New Jersey. I grew up in the northern area of New Jersey on the Jugtown Mountain Range, which is like right by the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And New York City was just a quick like hour and a half drive, 2 hour drive north of me. So in that very tri-state area type of location is where I grew up. I grew up in Hunterdon County and was primarily like in the Jugtown Mountains is a very forested area, but there was also Route 78 was a highway that ran right through the mountains. So on one side of my house was this like interstate highway, but then on the other side of the house was this full little background mountain range, this nice forest of ashwood trees and birch trees as well. And there was also like an abandoned quarry a good mile back into the woods that was always kind of cool to walk around at. There was a pond there. So I grew up in a nice, relaxing kind of area, not really too urban, a little more rural per se. But I had a early exposure to music in my childhood. My father, he actually worked as a rock keyboard player. So he played in like a couple of bands growing up before I was growing up, like when he was growing up. By the time that I was born, primarily working in office jobs, so I didn't get to see as much of that side of his life in my early childhood. But later on down the years, when I started my collegiate education and forward, my father began to re-implement himself into that kind of musical world, and so I got to see more of the stories in action, or kind of like the prior history of him before I was born, like coming to life during my life. So my early exposure to music was definitely on part of my father. And for my father, on part of his grandfather, my great-grandfather, who I believe worked as a church organist at a couple places. And I believe he played a horn instrument as well. It might be trumpet. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, music was definitely always a part of my family growing up, primarily classic rock. I sang in like, general school choirs, as most of us seem to do when we grow up. high school, middle school. I did that. I tried trombone in the seventh grade, but it didn't really match up with me too well. And I really started taking piano lessons like in my second year of high school. It was my sophomore year at that time. I think like it was February of 2016. Um, so yeah, but aside from that, I played rec soccer growing up. I played rec basketball for a little bit. I was like 2 years I did that. I lasted for like maybe 3 months doing baseball. It just really was not my cup of tea. I don't know, but yeah, it's a little bit of a background to me. I went to school at college, at least at a Moravian college, which is now Moravian University, and that is in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And since then, in 2021, I actually moved up to Vermont. So I'm now in New England, which is a very nice little area of the country. And since moving here is when I really began working more as a musician and kind of taking the music, which I've been self-studying and kind of creating and bringing it more into the world. I work as a street performer in a couple of towns around here in Vermont, and I do like small performances here and there, and also the recording now as well.
Ah, I went to New Jersey a few years ago, and I went to Red Bank. And
Yeah.
I guess you can kind of know why I went to Red Bank. That's where the Secret Stash comic book store is at.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I got my first experience with the Jewish deli there too. Best pastrami I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, that's one of the things about Jersey is that the Jewish baked goods and like food and also the Italian food is phenomenal there. It's like some of the birthplace of like Italian American traditions and other sorts of kinds of Americana synthesized traditions.
So back to your dad real quick. What kind of rock did he play?
Yeah, so he honestly has a good ear for just about anything at this point. Like I can't remember what it was. I believe maybe a couple months after I graduated, my dad was like telling me that he had a blues gig that was coming up, which I was totally taken back by because I never imagined him playing blues music, but he was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do that." And it's funny, we kind of had a little synthesis of the minds because he was like, "How do you play blues music?" But I understood blues harmony a little bit, so we had a good little detailed conversation about it. But so he played in two significant groups that I think were more relevant in Europe than they were in America when he was growing up. And those were Shotgun Symphony and Bronx Casket Company. These were definitely more like heavy rock type of music, not necessarily to the degree of metal, but on that borderline for sure. So he was doing more of that hard kind of stuff. And prior to that, when he was much younger, he played in a band White Lightning, although I don't think they did any recording. I believe they just did like live performance, covers and a few originals. Actively, what he does now is that he is the keyboard player for a band called Angel, and they were like a glam rock band, which some people seem to be familiar with them. Yeah, they would like Punky Meadows is the lead guitarist, and they dress up in like all white. They're a wonderful group of people, but he's the keyboard player for kind of like their revival of the band in the 21st century. And he still actively plays with them, records with them, travels with them. I've been able to sit in on a couple shows and like meet the bandmates as well, and they're all like funny, great people as well. So he's really like he's comfortable doing a whole bunch of stuff. With the record label Deco, he does keyboard parts for a couple of the different recording projects there as well. So his vocabulary, it's vast and far-reaching, and it's still being explored today too. He's still a young man at his heart.
Yeah, man. What was cool was their logo. You could turn it upside down and it still spelled Angel.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it until like one time I think he was holding up a sticker and he's like, "Look at this," and he's holding it and then he inverted it, and I was like, "Whoa, check that out."
Yeah,
I like that you can do that.
I believe a fan did that for them, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I know that band. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would love to get them on the show at some point.
Oh, you definitely should. Absolutely. I mean, they would totally be down for it. I'm more than positive, but certainly have to see and such. But yeah, no, and they're cool. I would have never known about their music had he not began to expose me to it. And I love seeing them live too. Like they're all still kicking. They put on a groovy show and they get everyone real excited in the crowd too.
So what kept you from going in that direction?
Yeah. And it's funny, that's a question I get asked a lot because it would make the most sense to follow in the footsteps and just continue rock and roll. And I started with piano too before switching over to kind of the more percussion and multi-instrumental realm. But I started primarily with just more casual piano lessons. It wasn't strictly classical piano lessons, but it wasn't strictly like, rock or blues or anything. It was more so just an early exposure to being able to read sheet music and begin understanding how to take songs that I was listening to, get the sheet music, and then how to read the sheet music for that and be able to play the songs that I liked. I didn't really start seriously considering music as something that I wanted to do, whether professional or as a hobby continuing forward, until about maybe say my senior year of high school, which is when I made the full-fledged decision that I wanted to go to music school. And I wanted to really, really pursue playing the piano as part of my studies as well. So when going to college, the immediate thing that I got put into was doing classical piano lessons. And that's kind of what began the more rigorous classical piano training. Very much at first, I realized quite quickly I was very far behind in where most collegiate level piano musicians would normally be at. So I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. And because of that, I really kind of ingrained in myself this idea of having to work solely on only technical aspects and classical aspects. So the idea of even wanting to play maybe more jazz type of music or more rock kind of music was somewhat on my mind, and I thought about it, but I felt I couldn't explore that territory until I had more of this foundation created. But then from my studies of that foundation, as I started getting more interested in the type of classical world of music, I started thinking more about like, well, I guess maybe when I'm continuing through my collegiate education or when I finish, maybe I may not want to continue with like rock music with Schwartz or anything like that. Sorry, my cat is hitting the piano right behind me. She's trying to play a concert real quick. Martha, how are you? Say hello. Um, but so I started to get really interested in these various classical composers who I was learning of and the different types of techniques that they would utilize. And I started thinking more of like, I don't really know if I want to go into piano performance per se, in whatever ambiguous realm that might be, but I kind of want to go into just composing music. And so I then picked up a composition concentration during my collegiate years. I started taking lessons in composition at the same time as my classical piano lessons. But at that time as well, I started listening to a lot more jazz music. And I found a type of freedom in jazz and a type of freedom in jazz that you can definitely find in genres like rock as well. Because in this type of idiom, I found improvisation, like improvisational nature in music, which is not something you really see in traditional classical music. It's essentially like, here's the piece of paper, you read what's on the piece of paper, you play that, and you don't play anything else.
Yeah.
Jazz kind of had more that avenue for you can improvise and do some other stuff.
Mhm.
Likewise, as well. And then I learned kind of more of how like, oh, rock musicians improvise as well. Soul musicians improvise. Just about everyone improvises. But you have to understand, in my naive perspective, I didn't really realize that going into music. Like there was a lot of this tradition of improvisation as a part of it. But then at a certain point, I discovered this composer Moondog, who had this synthesis of both like strict classical writing, but also this very improvisational drum playing, which really, really appealed to me. And I was just fascinated by it. And I started doing some independent projects during my collegiate education that involved this composer. And he passed away in 1999, so he's been deceased this whole time. But I began to do some projects with his music, and then over time got in contact with people who were, alive at the same time as he was, actually met him, actually worked with him. And I slowly kind of found myself getting more into this type of circle surrounding Moondog. And when that kind of really started to kick off, the idea of wanting to pursue more of this type of maybe like a jazz or rock career instead, or trying to play music more in that direction, kind of escaped me. I wasn't as primarily interested in it. I was still a huge fan of the kind of music, don't get me wrong. Like I love King Cobra, I love AC/DC. I grew up with AC/DC as well. I'd always listen to them with a good friend of mine growing up, and we would go to his house. We go to like antique malls together, and when his mom would be driving us, we'd listen to AC/DC the whole drive there. I love Styx as well. But I find that that type of music is a music I love and I like to appreciate, but it's not the kind of music that I feel an inner desire to contribute to and to create more of, if that makes sense,
Yeah. So
Mhm.
you're not thinking maybe of getting into Prague?
Because I like prog music a lot, like Genesis, King Crimson. Gentle Giant was my first exposure to that kind of music too. It was their album Acquiring the Taste, and it still is one of my favorite kinds of music. And honestly, I play around with a guitar player back home here in Vermont, and he and I do this. He's more of an acoustic guitar player, which works quite well with the trimba being an acoustic instrument. And he and we kind of do some relatively, I don't really know how to describe it, like progressive singer-songwriter type of tunes, I guess, that have these jam sections to them. Not jam in the sense of like a jam band like Fish, but more jam in the sense of like how bands like Gentle Giant or King Crimson might jam. This very rhythmically precise type of sound that also has this free flowing yet quirky melodic and harmonic nature to it. It's music I'm definitely interested in. I haven't gotten to recording anything or really taking any of that avenue of music too seriously, but I'm open to it though, Kyle. Like for sure, it's something I think at some point within my life and career I will find myself playing around with more. Just not something I'm currently looking at.
I paint and draw,
Hmm.
and I love doing it, but I love doing my own stuff. And I've had people ask me, why don't you do this professionally? That'd be great. I know I could probably make some money at it. But then I think if I get caught up with somebody telling me I need you to paint this or make this picture, then I'd
Hmm.
start to hate it. And I don't want to
Yeah.
hate it.
Hmm.
And I mean, I could see how, people get caught up in pop music and that kind of thing. And that, yeah, you're going to make some money at it, but do you really love it? So it
Hmm.
sounds to me you want to just continue to love it instead of just, hey, I want to make money.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it. Because naturally it is always important to think of finances because at its core it's a
Yeah.
very necessary part, in American culture and just about many in every culture at this point. It's important to consider that and consider like if you're pursuing music, there's always the big risk of it's not necessarily a market that everyone is able to financially sustain themselves through. There's a very limited amount of people who are able to financially sustain themselves through this music. And many of them find themselves compromising too, exactly what you're just saying, like pop music to be able to do that, or something that's more mainstream in order to do that. Which that's not to say that I am opposed to helping out on like pop tracks or rock tracks, for example, but it's
Right.
definitely like projects of that sort are ones that I couldn't necessarily see myself being the figurehead of, or like spearheading or being the leader of a project like that. Contributing to definitely, but being the kind of like the heart behind it and the one who's pushing it forward and making it be, it doesn't seem to be something I would find myself doing, you know?
I mean, and not to say that you're not making money doing this, but you don't want to go that sellout route of doing what other people want you to do.
Exactly, yeah. And I feel like there's many musicians who can empathize with that. I feel as if, and not even musicians, just artists as a whole. Even as you were saying, you do some painting as well. Many of us artists seem to be multifaceted. If we're musicians, some of us might also paint. If we're painters, some of us might also make music or do poetry and such. But there's definitely a type of feeling many artists can empathize with, and that's the feeling of like nonconformity. I think at our core, what kind of brings us to doing something like art is this realization of some type of internal opposition to what is normally being bestowed upon us. It's like, no, I don't want to accept that because I've already found my own way that goes in this direction. Um, and I think some of the most significant and influential artists, financially achievable or not, that's like aside, are some of the ones who always talk about that whole idea of like, I always was just kind of on my own path. This is someone like Moondog was like that. I think David Bowie was the one who said something along the lines of like, you're making art when you're uncomfortable. And whenever you're in a new situation, you're always going to have a bit of uncomfortableness to you.
Mm-hmm.
So like a phrase like that, for example, like echoes is going to continue echoing so far into the future because there's an honesty to them. There's always two sides to quotes like that, but there's certainly just a sheer face value honesty to it.
Mm-hmm. Why not get into drumming?
What got me into drumming, you were saying?
Well, I mean, why not just be a drummer?
Oh, why not? Yes. So I thought about that too, and it's interesting because my actual approach to the trimba playing is I don't have any prior kits practice or lessons whatsoever under my belt. The
Hmm.
only type of percussion I had prior to the trimba was technically piano, because technically piano is a percussion instrument. But also, even that aside, I did take snare drum lessons, marimba lessons, and timpani lessons for a short period of time during my collegiate years. Which all of those are like it's mallet instruments. You know, you play them using drumsticks or mallets, and it's more so like you're kind of vertically lifting up your hands and then striking them down in this very vertical motion. The trimba is different because the right hand is this horizontal stick motion, and the left hand is not even vertical or horizontal, it's this diagonal stick motion. So even that is separate from what percussion experience I already had. So why not get into kit playing? I didn't get into kit playing primarily because I wanted to, as a composer, I during my collegiate years wanted to start writing more music that kind of sounded similar to this guy Moondog. He had this very distinct harmonic writing practice, and he had this very distinct rhythmic practice. And the rhythmic practice was all solely based in this instrument that he invented, the trimba. And so because of that, I had the idea of where I could creates music in a very similar way to how Moondog did, and in tandem also play and perform some of Moondog's music too, because I wanted to continue a school of music that was solely birthed from this single individual. And since this single individual didn't play a regular trap kit, I thought, I don't think I want to play a regular trap kit either. And since continuing to explore with the trimba, I've actually played it on occasion where I'll put it on a raised surface so that I have access to my left and right feet. And I'll maybe try playing like a hi-hat with my left foot and then a bass drum with my right foot. Or maybe I'll attach a tambourine to one of my feet and try to play almost in more of a kit type of style. Um, but it's not something that really spoke to me too much. I also feel as if the trap kit, there are so many drum players as is, and we as humans have explored a lot that can be done with the trap kit. You know, from its origins to where it exists now, we have done so much with that instrument and have explored so much. You know, there are many drummers who have continued to add to the vocabulary of it. There's still drummers today who continue to add to the vocabulary of it as well. When it comes to the trimba, however, we had Moondog, we had his apprentice, Stefan Lakatos, and then you have a handful of other individuals, primarily throughout Europe, who have recreated the instrument and continue it in their own way. I am another one of those examples of someone else who took the instrument, recreated it, and continuing to expand the vocabulary of it. So I didn't get into trap kit playing because I felt there was already an instrument right in front of me that I was actively studying that could see some expansion of vocabulary, but at the same time, a preservation of the original vocabulary too.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
So, have you seen the documentary about the Stooges and Iggy Pop?
No, I haven't.
You need to watch it?
Okay.
There's a part in the documentary where Iggy was talking about I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a guy that he would create his own instruments, and
Mhm.
you know he would have album after album of all these different instruments that he made up, and the Stooges would just sit there and listen to this, and then they would kind of get ideas for what they wanted to do with their music. God, I
Mhm.
wish I could remember the guy's name, but check it out and see if you could get the guy's name and listen to what he does. Maybe you can incorporate that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just wrote it down. I'll certainly check that out. Because as you can tell, I have this fascination with people who are inventing their own instruments. I think it's a very interesting way to progress musical vocabulary today. You know, for some people, I feel as if they think it's like the only way to continue is to create newer and newer sounds. We're always trying to find ways to change and make music different from what it is before, you know?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
Mhm.
look what the Kinks did. I mean,
Yeah.
they ran knitting needles into speakers to come up with that distortion sound, and look how that changed music.
It really did.
God, I wish I could
Yeah.
remember the name of the documentary too, man, but I think it's on Prime. if I'm not Amazon Prime, but I
Yeah.
believe you can
Well,
catch it
I'll
on
definitely
Freevee.
find it. Yeah. I'm like voracious for knowledge. So when I hear about new things like this, I'm like, yep, this is going on the list of different things I need to look at and study a bit at some point in my life.
Oh man, do you listen to Frank Zappa?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, Zappa is another one of those type of like these unclassifiable individuals to a degree because his
Yep.
musical vocabulary changed so much throughout his life. Yeah, and I say that because like Moondog is another one of these somewhat unclassifiable individuals. You know, he sometimes has this jazz and classical sound, but sometimes this total left field, primitive bohemian sound. And Zappa, not in the same timbre, but just in a different musical vein,
Mhm.
totally does the exact same thing, you know?
Oh man, and I absolutely love Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And by the
Mhm.
way, it's because I watched a documentary and Billy James was on the documentary that I met Billy James.
Really? That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, he sends me some great music, man. And I'm
Hmm.
very appreciative of you guys taking time out to be on my show. And I hope to introduce people to stuff they might not normally hear.
Hmm.
And I mean, you've got this album, or you've got these two singles.
Hmm.
Um, do you have just an album itself?
No, so actually the only released music I have done so far is just Thorn and Roots. I've
Okay.
during my collegiate years I wrote quite a lot of pieces of music,
Mhm.
but I never got around to trying to record any of these. They're primarily done in live performance with the college ensembles or at like my senior recital as well. I did a selection of tunes that I composed, but none of these have been recorded yet. That's not to say that they won't be recorded. I'm hopeful if at some point in life they probably will be recorded, but it's a matter of time and like organizing these as individual projects. And many of them are kind of like shorter compositions. In the world of classical music, there's this type of like unspoken idea of like pieces of music usually might last like they're more longer form, like a single piece of music may be in 3 movements and it might be 30 minutes long, or it might be in like 5 movements and it might be an hour long. Many of my compositions were far more shorter in nature. It might just be a one-off dance-like type of number. There's a clarinet quartet I wrote called Song of Shmuel, which was a reharmonization of like 3 klezmer tunes. And that gets up to about like 6 minutes or so. But many of these kind of compositions, I think at some point I will want to revisit them and maybe put them together in a type of like a smorgasbord album, for lack of a better term, that kind of just has a eclectic selection of many of the pieces I was writing earlier on.
Mhm.
Um, but actively, as of right now, I am working on the early stages of another project, which is going to be a album, or not an album, an EP, which will feature the trimba once again, but also the trimba being played along with a piano. And there's been an album done like this before called Moondog Piano Trimba, which was done by Stefan Lakatos, who is my mentor and Moondog student, and
Mhm.
also a piano player who played with Moondog. Her name is Dominique Ponti. And this is a really nice album. Stefan, he was never too happy with the way the trimba sounded on the album, but I think it honestly sounds pretty good. But so I want to kind of take the sound of that album as a little bit of a foundation and utilize it for this EP that I'm going to be working on. And you'll be hearing both Moondog tunes and Julian tunes on there. And you also maybe be hearing 1 or 2 vocal compositions as well by Moondog and probably a little percussion composition by myself as well. Right now, it's very much in these early stages. I'm currently writing the music and sending them off to the piano player who will be playing for it. But I'm very excited to see what this is going to look like. There's no set release day or anything. The recording is currently not scheduled, but in the near future, uh, we'll hopefully see some more progress being done on it.
Who did the artwork?
Yeah, so the artwork is by is a good friend of mine in my collegiate years. His name is Garrett Flanagan. And Garrett, he has this very, I describe it as geometrically expressionistic art. It's very geometrically based in that you can see straight lines, but also some of these curvy lines, but these identified shapes. And it's very expressionistic in that it kind of takes human figures and will stretch and warp them in these inhuman ways. But so Garrett did the album artwork, and the way that he did it was that I had the idea where the front of it would be a picture of me holding the maraca over this wooden floorboard, and that the back would be me holding a clave over this wooden floorboard because the trimba is played with the maraca and the clave. And so I took those pictures and sent them to Garrett and had him superimpose his artwork over top of it. And then also I had him put like the, side A, root 4, side B, thorn and roots. And then on the back, he did the credits in his own text font as well, which, credits myself, the individual who mixed the album, Pat Noon, and then also Garrett himself for doing the artwork. But yeah, he's the one who did the album art, and his artwork it's pretty far reaching as well. He has done clothing, he has done prints, he has done like skateboards where he will superimpose his artwork over a skateboard and then sell those as well. He has done digital media. He has used an entire TV screen as a medium as well, and then like superimposed his artwork over top of it and had like an electronic image projected on the TV behind the image. So he's a really cool guy. Anyone who's listening should certainly check out Garrett Flanagan. His art's far reaching. He does music as well. I kind of describe his music as like King Cruel on acid in a free form setting. And that is the best way I can describe it. But it's some thought-provoking material.
Yeah, I really dig it, man. That artwork was so cool. I was like, I gotta ask him about that.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of talked a little bit before we got started, but I'm curious, has there been anything in your life like a hurdle that you've had to overcome?
Yeah. So as I've mentioned occasionally, there is this individual, Stefan Lakatos. And so Stefan, he was in the history of Moondog. Moondog lived in America most of his life, but he moved to Europe in the early 1970s. And when he moved to Europe, he originally went there for a concert in Germany, but then just didn't come back. He just stayed there. So he was certainly there like illegally for a period of time, but eventually got his citizenship and was able to continue living out in Europe. But while there, Moondog at this time, he invented other instruments throughout his life. But when he went to Europe, he only brought the trimba with him. And so in his later career, and as his music exists today, the only remaining musical instrument that is of contemporary significance is the trimba. He invented others that we hear recordings of, but he didn't use them in his later career. But so when he moved to Europe, this art student, Stefan Lakatos, was very interested by his music and was equally interested as I am in the percussion sounds. He thought it was like a whole percussion ensemble accompanying this classical music, and then soon discovered it was just this trimba instrument. And so Stefan and Moondog actually met. With due time, Stefan built his own trimba and then had Moondog over to his house. Moondog lived in Germany, Stefan was in Sweden. And so the two of them began hanging out. And with due time, Moondog stopped playing the trimba quite as much to accompany his own music and kind of entrusted Stefan to be the trimba player. And although Moondog didn't necessarily teach Stefan much about music writing, Stefan learned from Moondog a lot about how to interpret his music and how to continue playing the trimba and utilize that to accompany the music and conduct the music. And so Moondog passed away in 1999, but Stefan continued living on, and he was the leading exponent of the authentic interpretation of Moondog's music. And I specifically say authentic because there's a number of other musicians who perform Moondog's music, but they might utilize more jazz idioms in the music, or they might utilize some of their own musical vocabulary. Stefan was this very strict Moondog authenticity only kind of performance guy. But so during my collegiate projects that I was working on, there was a project I did in the it was the fall of my senior year, and it was titled The Music of Moondog. And in this project, I wrote like a short biography about him. I presented an analysis of 10 of his vocal rounds, and then also provided lesson plans of how to teach 6th and 7th graders some lessons based around Moondog's music and teaching them to interpret the rhythms. And as the ending kind of icing on the cake for this project, I was able to get in contact with Stefan and actually interviewed him for it. And from there, Stefan and I actually became quite good friends by the end of the interview. We kept in contact. And with time, I was able to tell him more of how I was practicing the trimba technique myself. And then in the summer of 2021, before I moved to Vermont, I actually built my own trimba. Um, but I didn't build the trimba at the time with Stefan's knowledge, because I also knew that Stefan had this he had this big opposition to other people who played the trimba that he didn't teach, because he was very protective of the tradition as it is. You know, Moondog didn't teach anyone to play this instrument except Stefan, so he took it as like a very personal gift, and he only wanted to give that gift to people specifically who wanted to continue in this authentic manner like he did. Throughout most of his career, I'm under the impression that he never encountered anyone who had that same type of feeling of preserving an authentic sound like he did. And thus, he was very opposed to any trimbist who ever would approach him. But with due time, he found out about my trimba and was open to me playing it, and welcomed me into playing the instrument, kind of in honor of him and in honor of Moondog. So then in August of 2022, I actually finally got to travel over to Europe. And while there, I met Stefan in Sweden. My partner and I stayed with him for a couple days at his apartment. And while there, I was able to play his trimba. We were able to sing Moondog songs together. And I had this very, very close and personal experience with him. And even after the trip, we were continuing to message each other. We would send music back and forth. He became like a really good friend and a mentor to me. But at this time when we visited him, he was recovered from a Whipple procedure because he had pancreatic cancer.
Oh,
And
no.
a Whipple procedure, yeah. The Whipple procedure is essentially what is done to, I don't specifically know if it's to remove the pancreas or simply the procedure to remove the mass that would form on the pancreas. But he essentially had this done. And although he was in good and recovered condition, he still had these moments of fleeting kind of spirit where he might kind of space out for a bit. So, you know, he was well, but he would have to cancel concerts on occasion if he wasn't feeling up to being able to play. And so, although he and I think part of that as well, the issue of mortality and the situation of it is what made him feel more open to inviting me in as a trimbist, because I think at the same time that I saw him having this mortal experience and realizing, I think this type of tradition is about to die off with this person, I think he also recognized that in himself, and he saw a type of safety and comfort within me being able to take what he has done and hold on to it as like tightly as I could and make sure it continues forward. And so we stayed close after I came back from Sweden, but then around in February, we heard word that he wasn't doing too well. And so he ended up passing away on February 10th.
Oh,
Um, yeah. And it was, I've had family members pass away in the past, but no one who was like, no immediately close family member. You know, I had older relatives who passed away who I might see during the holidays, but in my youth, as I feel like for many people in their youth, we don't really understand how significant the loss of like a grandparent might be, or even like a aunt, like two families away or something like that. But so I haven't had any family member who's really close to pass away in my life. Stefan, he kind of took on this almost grandfather-like motif for me in my life and this mentor figure. So when he passed away, and more specifically when I started hearing that he wasn't doing too well, and he and I were able to talk each day leading up to when he passed away, I kind of felt this great sorrow, this feeling of grief that I hadn't really experienced before. Um, and so when he did finally pass away, you know, it was a difficult day for me. It was a difficult day for his kids, for his family, for his friends. For anyone who knew him, it was certainly a hard time to accept that he was gone, because he was also just, you know, for as significant of a musical figure as he was also just a great guy, Kyle. Like, he was a very friendly person. I remember when we stayed with him, we're walking by one of his neighbors' windows, and their window was open and they had all this food just sitting in the window. And we stopped there, and he turned to them and started talking to them, saying like, "Oh, the food smells really good." And they seemed confused at first, but then they were just having a full on conversation. And then the woman who was cooking the food, she gave Stefan and I, my partner, some plates. And so we were eating some food there, and then we went to his apartment. I was like, "Say, who was that?" And he was like, "I have no idea." And I was like, so he's just this very cordial, outgoing person. He would go up to complete strangers' windows, and then we have dinner in our hands. Like he was very quirky in that sense. And if anyone look up a picture of Stefan Lakatos, he's this large, holly jolly Santa Claus kind of looking fellow. And he acts in the exact same kind of way. But
Wow.
yeah, no, he was a kindred spirit. But his passing though, it exposed me to like the emotion of grief in a very real sense. Um, and it was difficult to deal with because there was now this trust put on me to continue what he has been continuing, alongside, other musicians who continue the tradition just in a different type of style. Um, but so there was this, I felt honored, I felt humbled, I felt sad, I felt angry because I was like, I wish I knew him earlier on in life and had more time to interact with him. But these are things you can't change. But there was a closure to it. In April, I was able to go out to Sweden again. I attended his funeral service and was able to meet family and friends of his who I did not meet before, which was very nice to be in the company of other people who were feeling these same things that I was feeling. Because back here in the States, it was essentially people knew Stefan as my mentor and teacher, but no one knew him personally in the way that I did. So the experience of feeling this great type of sorrow for someone who's across the ocean was uniquely felt in me in America, at least. So then being able to go over there and see all these other people, it was a type of validation. There was a comfort behind it. Um, and I've been able to become good friends with his family as well and keep in contact with them. So I'm definitely like in a better space since the experience. But it was a very recent one. It just happened this year. Even as I'm like kind of talking about it, I'm realizing I haven't talked about it too much in the past couple months, just because it's June at this point. I've been doing all right with it, but I get a little sad thinking about it, but it's a heartwarming kind of sad. It's a happy sad.
Oh, yeah. So are you feeling like you need to find that, and pardon the crude analogy, but a Padawan you can pass the force on to?
Yeah, yeah, kind of very much like that. And yeah, that's a good analogy also, not too much of a crude one. It kind of feels like that to a degree. I just don't have a lightsaber, I have triangle drums. Exactly, yeah. Um, but I do have that type of feeling because I'm also relatively different philosophically than Stefan was. Stefan was very adamant on only teaching the trimba to people who would use the trimba to play Moondog music or music inspired by Moondog. I'm very much someone where I feel a little differently, but it's also because I look at the history of any instrument. When the saxophone was first invented, it found its home in jazz music, but since then, it's expanded off and done so many other things. The
Yeah.
hammered dulcimer, when it was birthed, found itself in just this type of niche, mountainy Celtic type of sound. And dulcimers originate from a variety of places around the world, but you look at a dulcimer today, and it's just about in every genre you can think of. There's no like a gatekeeper of the dulcimer has to only be played in this specific niche type of music. So I kind of have like two kind of goals, I guess. I certainly want to find that additional young Padawan to understand how to authentically interpret this music and continue it. But also at the same time, I recognize that some people will see the trimba and will not want to do that with it. They will want to do their own thing. They will want to experiment with it. And I think that's okay as well. I think it's just important to definitely have a definition between the two, authentic and then contemporary,
Yeah.
because it's good to have both. I think it's important to have both because just like anyone, they don't want to forget their roots. Like I know at my core, I come from Italy. I live in America. Family's been in America for a couple generations, but I know like, my roots are back over in Palermo, Sicily. Someone who came from Ireland, they know their roots, but maybe they've been in America for well over 16 generations at this point. But you still want to know your roots. You want to know where you came from. And I feel like anyone who plays the instrument, whether they play the tradition or not, they should still just at least know the tradition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as an outsider, I think it would be a great tribute to expand on it but without bastardizing the music, kind of like, I mean, I know there's people that love hip hop and stuff like that. Personally, I don't. I feel like they take music that's already been done and they've put this twist on it that some people appreciate. Me personally, I don't. I feel like it's being bastardized, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. And you're like that, and an opinion like that, it's important to have an opinion like that, though, because like for everything that exists, we should have many perspectives looking upon it. I feel quite oppositely. I feel as if like hip hop music, I understand the argument of that it could be seen as like a bastardization of already created tunes and almost Frankensteining them into something else. But even within that alone, I almost see like a different school of art being birthed. And I quite like it myself, but I also, I do find examples that I don't like of it too much. But very similarly with Moondog as well, you're right, because there's a big French scene for Moondog. He's very relevant in a French music culture, or is kind of like gaining traction over there. But there's a big thing where many hip hop artists like to sample this one song of his called Bird's Lament. But it's funny because I'm a total hypocrite. And when I hear people sampling Bird's Lament, I get upset by it. I don't know why. I'm totally morally, I'm okay with it. Philosophically, I'm okay with it. But I think just on the premise that I knew Stefan didn't like it, I had this type of like seventh sense where I'm like, oh, if Stefan didn't like it, I'm not supposed to like it either. But I get what you mean. Exactly. Yeah.
I know
But
what you
then
mean.
even like, yeah, but people who will take like Moondog's music and then kind of like they'll play the melody, but then improvise over top of the melody in a jazz type of sense. That's almost like another example of the hip hop argument, but for jazz instead. But also at the same time, like jazz, I guess, is different because if you think about it, much of the early jazz music was either written by jazz players or they were written by pop musicians who jazz musicians then took and jazzified it. Songs like what is it, like LOVE, Nat King Cole, when he sings that, like L is for the way you look. Plenty of jazz musicians have taken that pop tune and then just they jazzify, you solo over top of it, you go back to the head. Yeah. This is like a thing I could just go on and on talking about.
Yeah, and you look at rap music, which I'm not a big fan of rap music, but it also helped get Aerosmith back on track again,
Yeah.
So it does have its good points, it has its bad points. I'm just not a big pop music kind of person. I know the Beatles were pop and I love the Beatles, but this kind of pop they play nowadays is just, it's not my thing. I'm just getting old and kind of cantankerous, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you too, because I do feel as if there's a type of at its core, I can't cite sources per se. I can't list like, oh, this pop artist and this is how I feel about them. This pop artist and this is how I feel about them. And then, this is my essay justifying my opinion. Quite honestly, it's like I don't listen to too much pop music. I've never been a big like mainstream radio station kind of person. I was always looking for where the community radio stations, what is the weirdest stuff that they're playing, and of the weirdest stuff that they're playing, what do I actually like? That was exactly, and there's beautiful little nuggets of music just being like radio broadcasted everywhere. But it's a shame that what is mainstream is more of this pop type of stuff. And I'm very naive to it. I don't really try to listen to it. When that type of music comes on, I don't find my ears actively engaging with it. There might be a couple tunes once in a blue moon that really get me. I will have to say, like, I'm not a huge Swift person myself, Taylor Swift, but she does write catchy melodies. I will give her that completely. Still a master of her craft in that sense. But I agree with you. I feel as if pop music has this type of, for lack of a better term, it does have a somewhat inauthentic type of feel to it. It has this very heavily produced sound nowadays as well, which isn't bad. But I find that even like of the recordings I've made so far, I don't like this heavily produced sound. I like to try to get the most authentic recording of what is happening right in front of me and use just that. Like, maybe a little bit of reverb, a little bit of compression, but it doesn't need much more on there. If someone is singing, I don't really want to hear an auto-tune correction of the voice, because
Exactly.
although that adds a timbral difference, don't get me wrong, because some people, when they're singing like that, they're still in tune. They just use the auto-tune for that difference in timbre. Honestly, it's not a difference in timbre I like. I feel as if each voice is already so unique in itself that is enough for me as is. I don't need this added electronic tone to it,
Right, right. When I lived back in the Houston area, there was a radio station that was from Alvin Community College,
Hmm.
and they would play stuff you don't hear anywhere.
Yeah.
They would, like, even the popular bands, they would play stuff you wouldn't normally hear on the radio. But I got introduced to some great music, like underground stuff, or stuff that would be popular, say, in Miami, but you wouldn't hear it in New York or Texas or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, if you're ever in the Houston area, try to find that radio station, because there's some really cool stuff on there.
I definitely will. Yeah. Because yeah, it's true. Like, community stations are some of the best. I remember it was the summer that I was back from my freshman year of college. So this was summer of 2018. I was working at this restaurant, and there was a chef there who tuned me onto this Jersey radio station, 103.3 WPRB. I still remember it too. And it was the Princeton College community radio station. But man, that station got me hooked on so many. I discovered Goose through that radio station. They was the only radio station I found playing like obscure contemporary classical music, although albeit they would only play it at like 2 in the morning. But like I could find people like Arnold Schoenberg and Harry Partch being played on that radio station. Um, but it's true, like community radio, it also has more of this type of this personality to it, because I feel as if the hosts on community radio station aren't trying to accommodate for a fan base. They're just actual people being themselves and then talking
Mm-hmm.
about the music. And for better or for worse, that is how they are acting. But there's just a great perspective of human behavior and nature present in community radio.
Yeah, I encourage anybody, look for your community college radio stations. They play some
Mhm.
great stuff. Hey man, do you have a website?
I don't have a website, but I actively try to just run all my important and relevant links just through like a link tree,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of this like it's a link access website that many musicians seem to be using. I know there's a couple other variations around there, around like that type of concept. But my link tree is literally just Julian period Trimba, all lowercase, just that. And on there, I have links to just any of the social media that I'm on. There's like Instagram, Facebook. Those are the two that I use the most for posting and like hosting events and interacting with people. I have TikTok and Twitter, although I'm not on them quite as much. TikTok I mostly use to post little excerpts of street performances if I'm doing them actively. If I remember to record them, it's not always the first thing that's on my mind, but I might be performing and then like, hey, maybe I should set up my phone and see if I can get some cool interaction to share with people. Twitter, I'm almost never on, honestly. I will occasionally make a little announcement on there, but I never had a Twitter prior to really doing music stuff. I never did too much on there, so it's just not within my natural behavior to utilize Twitter. I also know Twitter is just in this incredibly volatile place right now, so but aside from that, I do have links like the music is on there. On occasion, when I find articles that are written about me, I'll put little links to the most recent ones on there, and also any YouTube videos that might have come out as of late. I'll throw them on there as well. But you remind me, Kyle, I need to make a website at some point, though. It's an important thing. It's something I should get to.
Yeah, you really should, man. I think people will enjoy it. It's not something that I say I was familiar with, but when Billy sent it to me, I checked it out. I'm like, this sounds kind of cool. So, kick
Mhm.
back, want to enjoy sitting around the fire or something, put this music on. I think you'll really like it. But
Yeah.
man, Julian, I've really enjoyed talking with you, man. And I wish the best for you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kyle, I appreciate it. And thank you for giving me this space to talk about these topics and concepts as well. This was a very enjoyable experience.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I'm going to do something I normally don't do. I got an email from this guy named Alex. He runs this site called Podmatch.
Mhm.
And Podmatch, I started using, I don't know, about a year ago, maybe less.
Mhm.
But anyway, I don't normally endorse people, but he did ask me if I would kind of mention it. So I hope you don't mind. I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
People
absolutely.
if people aren't sure about this site, I'm telling you, it is awesome. You get on there, make your profile. If you want to be on a podcast, or if you are a podcaster, you set up your little profile. You can do the free one, or you can do the paid one. I personally do the paid one. I think I pay like $6 a month. And if you do enough interviews, and the person that you're interviewing, if they paid their end, you get a percentage of that. And I've made, gosh, what, 400 or 500 bucks doing this, and you're
Mhm.
talking, I haven't even made an investment of $100 into that thing yet. So
Wow.
um if you're interested, man, get on there. I'm sure people would be interested in having you on their show.
Yeah. No, I'll certainly check that out. It's called Podmatcher, you said?
Yeah, podmatch.com. Yeah.
Podmatch.com. Yeah, no, I will certainly check that out. It's I'm always looking for spaces to talk about these concepts and things, because I don't want to always talk off the ears of my friends about these things. Like we'd rather just talk about what's going on in life and such.
Oh yeah.
I'll check that out though. Yeah, Podmatch.
Yeah. And Podmatch, I mean, you whatever you're into, I mean, there's paranormal stuff on there. There's actors, musicians, there's authors, there's life coaches. Most of my life coaches that I talk to come from Podmatch. So anybody out there, if you're interested, they do pay. It's linked to my PayPal, and once I've met my $100, about what, 3 or 4 days after I've met that $100, they send it to me. It works. So putting in my little endorsement there.
Cool. Podmatch, everything under the sun and then some.
There you go. There you go.
There you
But
go.
man, thank you again. And I also want to thank all you folks out there. If you are new to the channel, well, I hope you'll come back, hit that subscribe button. And for my regulars, and you guys are awesome because you make it possible for me to do this. And please like, share, turn on those notifications. Check out all these great people that I get to talk to. Man, I make a lot of great friends doing this as well. So until the next one, everyone, please take care. Be kind to one another. God bless and peace.